last 25 years, I've had the privilege of interviewing very interesting people. Everyone who is anyone, both the famous and the infamous, from presidents and their first ladies to kings and queens, movie stars and pop stars, captains of industry, heads of state, sports personalities, innovative entrepreneurs, and some pretty great everyday people. They've all sat down for the star treatment. Today, I'm proud to introduce you to Grant Venerable, a scientist and educator who explores the connections between the arts and technology. Grant, welcome.
Thank you.
Sir, tell us about your professional beginnings and what led you to the career that you've chosen.
Many things led me to the career, and they were quite unexpected careers mostly. I thought as a child I wanted to be a mechanical engineer and following my father's footsteps. I had an insatiable interest in science, in the body, how the body works, and astronomy, in the solar system. And my father observed me and my family observed me, and they knew I was headed into the sciences. But at the same time, at age 3, my first activity was really art, and that was mainly developed in church because this AME service was 2 hours and a half, and my mother always took drawing materials and crayons for her little children to draw on during the sermons. But junior high school is when seriousness began to take over, and the Russians were putting up satellites, and the national leaders were putting out a call for kids to consider studying science. And so I began to set my sights on science and mathematics in high school.
Please describe for me your educational background in detail. I'm curious about what ultimately led you to pick the major you chose.
Probably the first factor was art classes in Fauché Junior High School, Los Angeles. Math science major, Manual Arts High School, Los Angeles. Graduated in 1960. UCLA chemistry major. Graduated in 1965. University of Chicago physical chemistry concentration. Graduated 1970, 67 with a master's, 70 with a PhD. Postdoctoral fellowship research, UCLA 1970, 71. Then my paid career started. Took a position eventually at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I converted myself to be in an industrial employment in Silicon Valley industry as a systems scientist. Anyone who understands anything about chemical structure and chemical reactions understands systems. And so that's what I did in industry for several years until I was called to San Francisco State for 7 years, interestingly, in the Department of African American Studies.
You're a bit of a revolutionary, a bit of a Renaissance man, and very clearly a brilliant person. What would you consider to be your greatest professional achievement, Grant?
Teaching chemistry so that, as my stepmom put it, people with no more than 2.5 brain cells could learn chemistry. The other thing is being able to distill the meaning of the chemistry I was teaching, which is teach not the little snitpick facts first, but teach the universal meaning, the idea of the subject first.
When you taught students, what would you try to impart to those students?
First of all, their chemistry, particularly in the chemistry classroom. Chemistry is the everything. It's the study of anything. You can find it everywhere. The whole principle of science is substance evidence. There's a logical relationship. If you have substance, then you have evidence, and all substance is a pure activity. It isn't the stuff. It's what the stuff is doing as an activity. And you are stuff that's alive and doing something. So once you get aware of your selfness as activity producing evidence of your selfness. You're conquering life. You're on the way to success.
Sir, we talk professional. I'm curious about personal. What would you consider to be your greatest personal achievement?
I think mastering myself, my mind, because that's really what's coming up as I go through each birthday. It isn't so much the bodily changes that are inevitable, but it's the mental changes where I've seen almost everything at this stage of the game. Well, of course I haven't, but it feels like that, and I can connect dots very accurately and deeply and see what connected with that led to this.
You have quite an extensive biography and a body of work that is unmatched in your area. What would you consider to be your crowning achievement as a professional as you come to more of the sunset of your career?
One is really conveying to students how to use the principles that I've taught in the classroom. That's had remarkable results. So that's a source of great pride to see what students have done. The other is being able to convert that to then teaching Black African American studies, which helped me put the whole picture together.
Sir, what do you consider to be the most rewarding aspect of your career?
I think now the most rewarding aspect is seeing I actually see some self-control over things that come unanticipated. I came from a religious family that I think prepared me for a secular society that has really no place for religion at its most understandable, powerful level of use. So I'm not talking about fundamentalism, I'm talking about what the Bible has taught people, what the Quran has taught people, what the Torah has, and the Buddhist tracts, all of that. There's a centerpiece of it, and I discovered that's what I was teaching with the Venn matrix of a system in chemistry, in that fifth part of the 5 aspects of a whole is that center that holds it together and unifies it. And realize years later, that's what people really call God. The word doesn't matter. What matters is that you know and live that center. And there's certain ways to enhance that. Some people do it by going to church. Some people do it by going to yoga, some other things, running, but they can center their lives in that 5th quintessential element.
How would you like to be remembered?
Well, you know, that's a good question, and I had to grapple with it like around 2012, because I couldn't figure out where I was going until I put together my last will and testament. I had been avoiding, okay, where are they going to plot what I leave here on earth? Once I figured that out, my brain got instantly clear. You're going to honor thy father and mother. My father was the first human being, person, student of African heritage, descent, who graduated from Caltech in Pasadena in 1932. I want to set up an endowment named for him, Grant Venerable, and my mother, Thelma Scott Venerable, so that the Institute can actually formalize the study of how does social condition actually affect the development of science and engineering. I think the indispensable element of that is where I came from, what people created me and my siblings. So I got more interested, even as a 20-year-old. The whole extended family knew I was interested in family genealogy. So people would start coming by from the ancestral regions of Kansas and Missouri, bringing me information on who the ancestors were, elderly cousins, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-greats. And that's when I began to discover okay, I could see what led my father's interest, what gave him this chutzpah to do what he did, and then found his own business because he couldn't really get a career in engineering. My father, his father, the father's father, was born a slave in 1823, and then in Kentucky. Abraham Lincoln was a co-descendant from the same ancestor as these men. Abraham Lincoln was a Venerable through his mother. And then these are two Venerables, who was president of the U of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. My father's sister, born 1893, my father's youngest uncle, grandfather's youngest brother, Blaine, and that's Blaine as a young man. My father's mother, Louise. My father's mother and father. My mother's mother and father. They're from Kansas, they're from Missouri. But that would be it, is exploring the roots and finding out the truth about what made us and so many African American families is not known. It's not in the textbooks. It's not being filmed in movies. It's scratching the surface now. But when I discovered my roots came out of Missouri, and that my father's people within like grandparental status were Confederate Army officers, it helped me in moving south to come to a whole new reconciliation of things that have never been reconciled since the Civil War, and seeing how people begin to talk from radically different positions and start to hear one another and start to hear there's more connection than difference. So it was these two families, my great-grandparents, who were owned by this other family, who stayed together after the end of slavery.
You know so much about a variety of areas. What areas do you consider yourself an expert in?
I'm an expert on the unity of knowledge, and that means the unity of the arts part of knowledge, including music, performing arts. It includes the sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities, because that's what my mentors taught me how to do, gave me a structure for doing it, and I've extended that structure now.
If I asked you to summarize your life's work in a single word, what would you choose?
The word unity jumps out, number one. And whether it's among people or with knowledge, technological problems.
I love getting to know the Marquis Whos Who listees. Talking to fascinating people is my life's work. But what does being a Marquis Whos Who listee mean to you?
My being here today, it means far more than it has in the past, because I realized Marquis was not just elevating a value for ethnic diversity, but diversity in its true sense. And once I glimpsed that in some of our earlier conversations, I realized that's what everyone here is about. And that's what has thoroughly blown my mind. And I'm seeing where Marquis is headed. And I didn't know it was headed there. So now I know.
Grant, thank you so very much for this conversation.
I appreciate your comment.
That was Grant Venerable, and I'm Star Jones for Marquis Whos Who, profiling the leaders of American society, men and women who are contributing to our nation's development and achievement.